Hello, I'm Kads, and welcome to today's video. So today we're going to be talking about my fusion plan for getting the latest fusion in the game, Sanguine Maria, aka Bloody Mary, I guess. That's what Sanguine typically means, associated with blood, and Maria, Mary, who knows? That's what we're going with. But yes, the Halloween fusion for 2025. Now, Sanguine Maria is a very, very interesting champion, to say the least. Very confusing champion, at first glance when it comes to her kit, as we'll dive into a bit here. But yeah, she is a legendary force affinity attack based, definitely nuker, more of a sniper, I guess, if you could think about it. Mostly single target attack, but there is some potential for AoEs in her kit. But yeah, she's definitely a PvP champion, at least based on her abilities, which is kind of what I've seen from test server footage as well. She's definitely built like a nuker sniper champion who is meant to fight in the arena, and some would be not necessarily super meta per se, but she can definitely contend with some of the things that go on in the current meta. So first things first, let's talk through her kit and try and make sense of it. First off, pretty decent base attack. It's not one of the highest in the game. We have nukers as high as like 1700, 1900, I guess, in the case of Carnage alt form, but 1500 is a serviceable amount of attack, and that can scale pretty darn decently. She's on the slower side for a nuker, at least nowadays, 99 base speed, but still, you can get her pretty darn fast. And of course, she has the bonus crit damage that most nukers have, attack, aura, in all battles, but you're probably not going to use that most of the time. So the main theme around Sanguine Maria is the number 3. So you're definitely going to see a lot of that, denominations of 3, multiples of 3, and etc. throughout her kit. So the A1 here, of course, attacks 3 times, and each hit has a 33% chance of granting an extra turn. However, this cannot grant more than 1 extra turn, meaning that each independent attack has or is rolling for that 33% chance. So when you add those together, I think it will probably equate to a 50, 60 something percent chance across all 3 hits that she's going to get an extra turn, but you can only get 1 from a single A1. So you can't just stack a bunch of extra turns based on each hit and then just have her go forever, more or less. So that's not the way that's intended to work. The A2 here, attacks from an enemy will ignore 30% of the target's defense by default, but it will ignore 99%, practically 100% of the target's defense, stone skin, and block damage buffs instead if the skill is used on a turn count that's divisible by 3. And initially we thought that this was kind of like, Sun Wukong and Odin, where it's just the number of turns taken in the battle, but this has been confirmed to be the number of turns that she takes. So as long as you use this ability on her 3rd turn, then you can get all of the bonus ignoring effects. If you do happen to kill the target, then it increases the cooldowns of all other enemy skills by 3 turns, and that effect cannot be resisted if this is also used on a turn count of 3, or a turn count of hers by a multiple of 3. Now this ability is quite nuanced, but we can simplify it by just kind of thinking about it in 2 separate ways. So if you don't care at all about what turn of hers is currently on, then this A2 is just going to ignore 1/3 of the target's defense, and if you do happen to kill the target, it will increase the cooldown of all enemy skills by 3 turns, but you would need accuracy to do that. So if you don't care about what turn it is, then you might want to put some accuracy on her. But if you are meticulous, you're tracking, you know that you're attacking or using this ability on turn 3, turn 6, turn 9, assuming you can get that far in the fight, then you can take advantage of the extra ignore defense, ignoring stone skin, ignoring block damage, and then the irresistible version of the lockout. And then we have the A3, which gets even more interesting and or complicated depending on how you want to look at it, but it's another single target attack, but before attacking it will remove all buffs from all enemies, and this cannot be resisted by enemies whose number of buffs they have is divisible by 3. So meaning that you would need accuracy. Otherwise, if they have 2 buffs, 1 buff, 4 buffs, etc., then you would need accuracy to remove all the buffs from all the enemies. But if they have 3, 6, 9, etc. buffs, then you would be able to irresistibly remove all their buffs before attacking, which could be good. You could remove block damage, you could remove unkillable, you could remove stone skin potentially, and all things like that. And then this ability does have the potential to become an AoE if any other remaining enemies aside from the one that you attacked have less than 66% HP, i.e. less than 2/3. So they have to be, damage has to have been dealt to them already. So if this is your opening move, that condition is irrelevant. But if you're cycling back through her abilities using the extra turns on the A1 or stuff like that, then potentially you could come back, use this on a single target, and then kind of AoE everyone else who happens to be low. And then this will grant an extra turn if this champion is under a number of buffs that is divisible by 3. And from what I've seen, the way this works is that it checks for a number of buffs at the end of her turn before seeing if it will grant her an extra turn. So if you have some sort of buff that disappears when her turn is ending, then it may or may not work. So like Lightning Cage, I would think, for example, if you have the 3 stacks and you attack and it disappears before her turn ends, then that buff disappeared and therefore it wouldn't count towards a stack of 3 or 6. 6. Whereas by contrast, if you had like a blood shield accessory on her, you have 5 buffs, and then you attack someone and you put blood shield on, or you put a small shield on yourself, that would count as 6 buffs at the end of her turn, and thus you would pass the check for the extra turn. So her kit is definitely pretty cool, but it also is kind of clunky and awkward, because the only way that you could realistically get to this ability on the 3rd turn is by killing someone with the A3 and then proccing extra turns on the A1, or just starting with the A1 until you get 2 extra turns and just taking the chance. It's not guaranteed. It's just, that'd be RNG at that point, and waiting until you get 2 extra turns and then going into the A2. So it's going to be hard to necessarily guarantee that you can use this ability on the 3rd turn, at least at the start of the fight. As you kind of cycle through a fight, you might be able to make it happen if you just kind of hold off on it. So it can be kind of just weird and clunky to kind of be waiting to use an ability, versus normally for, your nukers, you want to just use their abilities when you want to use them. But that being said, from what I've seen, the payoff of using this ability on the 3rd turn is a massive increase of damage, of course, because you're basically ignoring all the target's defense. Therefore, you're practically dealing pure damage on top of ignoring the stone skin and block damage. When it comes to her passive, she gets a little bit of survivability. So if you hit her once and she dies, you're not really going to see much of this benefit. But each subsequent hit that this champion receives is going to deal 33% less damage, and it stacks up to 99%. So if you think about, for example, a Marius triple hitter, if she doesn't die on the first hit, the second hit is going to do a lot less damage, and the third hit's practically going to do no damage, and then that's going to reset after that instance of her taking no damage is applied, and it goes back to her taking normal amounts of damage for the first hit, etc. The cycle continues. On the flip side, when she is attacking other people, she will deal 33% more damage for each subsequent hit from this champion. So that means, once again, if we talk about being able to cycle through her abilities, if you can somehow make it happen that the 3rd hit also coincides with the single target of the A2, she will deal basically double damage. I don't believe that that's worth necessarily trying to make happen. I think that would just be kind of a nice to have ability, kind of like Rathalos Blade Master. You don't really force him to deal the big hit on his A2, but when it does happen, it's kind of nice and whatnot. The last bit of the passive is that whenever an enemy champion is revived, it will revive this champion with 33% health and 66% turn meter, and then after being revived, she will place a true fear on all enemies for 2 turns that cannot be resisted or blocked. So if they have block debuffs up, it's not going to do anything, and no matter how much resistance you have, it will still land on you. So be careful if you're reviving your allies and you're going against a Maria. It's worth noting that her passive does not have a cooldown at all whatsoever, so if you're doing a bunch of revivals, you're going to keep true fearing your team throughout the entire fight. But of course, on the flip side, you do have to worry about the potential for her getting sheeped by placing these true fears. Polymorph is still out there, even though it's a lot less prevalent, it is still out there. So this is the only debuff in her entire kit, and you can definitely get sheeped from placing the true fears. So what letter grade would I give this champion based on her kit and the footage I've seen from the test server thus far? In terms of a nuker, I do think she's pretty solid. I think I would probably give her somewhere like the A-, the A rank. Again, I don't think she's going to be like super meta defining type of champion. It's kind of hard to make her ignore stone skin. It's not something that you can guarantee that you can always start the fight off by doing. You kind of have to roll the dice with a little bit of RNG to get that bonus. And there's a lot of, hidden aspects of her kit that you may or may not have access to, depending upon which turn you're using it on and the status of the enemy turns and enemy buffs and your buffs, and etc. So it can be kind of finicky to make certain things happen, make the stars align to make certain things happen. But she can be just kind of a fun, interesting champion that when the stars do align, she can hit ridiculously hard and just kind of go and take a lot of turns potentially back to back to back. When it comes to her passive, she definitely can have a little bit of survivability, particularly against champions with AoE on their A1s, or, supports who attack on their A1s and whatnot. But just because, if the stars align once again and the supports who go first, they happen to attack you the first time, the second time, and then the nuker goes, they're not going to deal any damage. So there is a little bit of potential survivability in her kit, but unlike a Rhodos, it's not just guaranteed you can't one-shot her, because if you just hit her with the first hit that she takes, she has no damage reduction, you just kill her, and it's kind of over from there. So anyways, I think she's a quite interesting champion, and I'm definitely going for her, but my default setting for my account and my position in the end game is that I go for every fusion regardless, so that's not much of an endorsement necessarily of her kit and her potential utility. So with that in mind, if you're also interested in going for this, let's hop over to the raid tools spreadsheet where we have the fusion plan itself for her fusion here. Now, this is notably a hybrid style fusion, which is typically the hardest style of fusion, because that means that you have to do a lot, if not all of the events, in order to gather fragments for the epics. There's no rares, you just skip right to the epics, but you have to fuse the epics and then rank them up and ascend them, and then fuse the legendary afterwards. In terms of the fusion itself, we have the pretty standard 4 dungeon split here at the top. We have no event dungeon for this go round, which is pretty nice. We have the 2 classic arena tournaments. We have a champion training tournament. We have a champion chase tournament. We have 2 gear hunters events. We have 3 gear enhancements. We have 1 champion training event, and then we have a standard summon rush. But we also have a mid-week heroes path with some base fragments here at 25, and then the bonus fragments up to 50. So the overall total for the fusion is that you can collect 450 of the epic fragments, meaning that you can kind of pick and choose where you want to have your pluses and minuses. For anyone who happens to be unfamiliar, this spreadsheet will be linked in the description box down below if you'd like to check it out for yourself. But essentially, this is just another form of the standard calendar that we get at the beginning of every fusion. But I also do summarize all of the different milestones in terms of what I expect them to be and what they actually are once they go live in the game. So anything here on the right hand side marked with an asterisk is an educated guess of what the milestone will be. But as you can see here, as example with the champion training event, once events go live, then I go in and put the actual values, and that way we have a record of what basically every fusion has had to offer in terms of the events and tournaments and their milestones, dating all the way back to Python, at least for the iteration of this spreadsheet. So the main thing I want to draw your attention to relative to the layout of this particular fusion is that mid-week heroes path, which is effectively another summon rush. When it is in the middle of the week, obviously in this case it dovetails right at the end of the standard summon rush starting tomorrow over the weekend. Whenever it is in the midweek, that gives me an inkling, gives me the feeling that they're going to have a pogo event, a pull one, get one. And given that we just had an ancient one last week, I would expect there to be, that's not a guarantee, so take it this with a grain of salt, but I would expect there to be some sort of special event going on right now. Of course, this weekend or these days do lead up to Halloween the following day afterward. But yeah, I would expect there to be some sort of sacred pogo event going on right now, as well as potentially a specific, maybe Halloween champion themed progressive chance event or something like that going on. But there should be something special to coincide with this to incentivize people to pull. And also I wanted to draw more attention to the fact that there are 75 fragments up for grabs. You could say, because the other half of this is a gear hunters event, that the 25 being offered here is the normal amount that we would get from a third gear hunters event, and then the 50 is what you would want go in excess of that in terms of pulling shards in order to get some points. But of course you can do the entire thing with shards as well, and so that will kind of be up to you and your particular strategy for your account. The other thing to point out here is at the bottom here where I've laid out my energy plan. This is how I plan to spend my energy. This is not necessarily a prescription of how you should be spending your energy over the course of the fusion, but just a catalog of how I plan to spend my energy over this course of the fusion. And as we can see here, there are a couple of pinch points, as I like to call them, which is just simply the overlap between champion training and some sort of dungeon tournament, just meaning that you have to be a little bit smarter with how you spend your energy over those days, because you do have 2 different types of event that don't necessarily overlap with each other in terms of your energy consumption. So the first pinch point here is the entirety of Ice Golem overlapping with the first champion training tournament, and then the second pinch point is the champion training event that overlaps with the entirety of the Fire Knight dungeon tournament. Switching over to a different tab, like I mentioned, this is a hybrid style fusion, meaning that we do have to collect 4 epics, and they are void epics in this case. So you do want to make sure that you do have enough potions to ascend them, as I mentioned earlier. So that in terms of superiors, that's going to be 12 arcanes, which you can get at any time, but you will need 24 superiors as well as superior voids, which typically is not a problem if you've been playing for a while, because most of us don't have a ton of void champions to level up. That's just the nature of void champions in the game in general. But nonetheless, if you do want to make sure that you do have enough of those, pay attention to when the void keep is open, because it is only open once per week on every Sunday. And you can see there we do have the days of the week in this fusion plan as well. So the first week has 1 day and the second week has another day where you could work on, or you could farm the void keep. So just keep that in mind. If you're a little shy of the 24, you don't want to screw yourself out of the fusion because you don't have enough potions to ascend the epics. The last thing I'll mention here is that you can see there's a couple of TBDs relative to the shard events. Ordinarily, I would kind of have some semblance of what my plan is from the get-go based on what the events are. So for granted, I knew that I was probably going to do a shardless champion chase here, and I knew I was going to pull 30 voids. Same thing, shardless here, 4 sacreds, etc., going all the way back. You can kind of see what my plans were. But in this case, I'm not really entirely sure what I'm going to do. I'm pretty confident, like I want to say 90% confident that I'm going to be skipping this first summon rush. I looked at the champions and they're not really that great. Some of them are something that I would like to have, but as I've mentioned for many times over the past few weeks, I am in Sacred Mercy. So I'm going to wait and see if my suspicion is correct that there is a Sacred Pogo going on for the second summon rush or this hero's path, and see if I can kind of double dip and get 2 legendaries for the price of 1 during whatever events are going on right now. Maybe again there's going to be a progressive chance for that one as well with a different set of champions. We shall see. Could be wrong, but regardless, I'm gonna have to pull my sacreds eventually, so this just seems like a better opportunity. And just because, you know, I could invest up to 6-7 sacreds and just get 1 set of epic fragments, or I could maybe invest like 10 to 12 sacreds and I could end up getting 75. So the relative proximity to greater rewards could end up making the fusion a lot cheaper in general in aggregate, just by focusing on this particular hero's path and pulling a handful more sacreds here instead of having to pull shards for the summon rush and this, and also the champion chase. Now my suspicion here is that the champion chase is going to be 2x ancients. We had 2x sacreds during the granite fusion, we had 2x voids just this past weekend, and so the next 2x that should be coming down the pipeline is 2x ancients. However, again, because this is Halloween weekend, they could do something special. They could do a triple 2x. We see those every once in a while, but I also expect that to be for more so for Black Friday next month in November. So they may or may not do something crazy like that. We haven't had 2x true 2x primals in a while, so they could throw that in the mix, but typically those aren't during fusions, so there's a lot of speculation there. Obviously we don't really know, but once we do know more so about this next week, then we'll confirm what 2x this is going to be for this champion chase. But yeah, so there's a TBD as far as my plans for how many shards I'm going to have to pull. Obviously the hero's path, we need to see it to know how many it's going to cost, and how much credit can I get from dungeon divers versus how much do I want to pull in investing in terms of shards. And then depending on how far I go for that one will dictate how much is required, if anything, to do for 2x ancients. But in general, 2x ancients I don't mind pulling, just because I have a lot of ancients. It's never necessarily a bad opportunity for me, but if I could just save shards, then maybe that makes more sense and I could skip dungeon divers or gear hunters or something else like that. So we'll kind of have to play that by ear based on what the events are going to be. But like I said, 90-something% chance, and I am going to be skipping this first summon rush. So now let's talk a little bit about the current events going on in the game, just give you a little bit of a preview of how I'm starting the fusion as it goes right now. As usual, at the beginning of fusions, I do like to take a snapshot of my supply count, namely the silver and the gems, just so that I can post at the end of the fusion on my community tab page, summarizing the deltas between those, just to help describe what it actually cost, at least for an endgame free-to-play player, what it costs in terms of silver and gems to complete fusions in the modern era. So we're going to benchmark it at 262 million. Obviously, the fusion started this morning. I've done a decent amount of champion trainings, we'll see in a little bit here, so I've earned some silver since then, but I benchmarked it this morning at 262. And then for the gems, we can call it 4250 because I haven't spent any thus far. So looking around at what is live yet, the first Gear Hunters event is going on, and it's as expected, unfortunately 3700 for a 3-day long event, so we're definitely gonna have to grind that out. But thankfully Ice Golem starts tomorrow, meaning that there is an overlap between champion training and a dungeon tournament, meaning that it's a little bit easier, or you're gonna doing both of them is gonna typically get you out there to that milestone. Granted, you are gonna have to spend a decent amount of gems in terms of energy in order to make that happen, but nonetheless it's going to be energy well spent because you're still actively working on fusion events during that entirety, so that is good. The summon rush starts tomorrow, I guess in a few hours at the time of this recording, so does gear enhancement, so we'll wait and see what to do there. And again, this is the summon rush that I do, at least on paper, plan to skip for now. And then when it comes to the tournaments, champion training is already alive and kicking, and I've done a decent amount of effort or work already. You can see here I think I'm at 6,000-ish points or 5,000-ish points already, so nearly halfway on the first day. So I had a lot of energy saved up. I do plan to use like the clan shop energy. We got 1,000 in the shop this week. I plan to use that as well on champion training. So yeah, I already 6-starred a champion. I've made a couple of 5-star chickens, again just using my energy stores that I already had ready to go for the next champion training event. And I do plan to go through the fragments all the way out to get myself that legendary tome, and I guess along the way we get some other cool stuff. And then yeah, Ice Golem starts tomorrow, so I'll be switching over to that a little bit, especially because I'm so far ahead relative to what I need to be doing for the champion training tournament. So yeah, that's going to do it for my fusion plan for Sanguine Maria. Let me know in the comment section down below, what are your thoughts on her kit from what you've seen, what you've heard, and what you expect her to be able to do in terms of PvP. Let me know if you agree with my assessment of her kit in terms of the letter grade, and let me know, of course, if you're planning to go for her in general. As always, if you did find this video helpful, then be sure to hit that like button down below. It really does help out the channel. And also feel free to hit the subscribe button down below if and only if you're enjoying the content on this channel for more content just like this one in the future. Thanks for watching and have a good one.